I'm going to do it to you again and give you another division, but this one is very subtle. This one is very potent, if you can hear, because it gets into cracks that probably have never seen the intellectual daylight before. Of course, some of these cracks only began to exist in the way in which I can try and sketch them for you in fairly recent history, but it goes like this. That everything that exists dually. In my first inclination, one of the words, I won't hesitate. They exist apparently. The second word, my first inclination was to say they exist both apparently and really. As all of you have already had your whole life to ascertain, to start talking about things being real, and then of course tacitly insinuates that there's a possibility that things are unreal. And then, first thing you know, you're gone. You're back in Woodstock. You're having flashbacks, if not psychedelically, just from your old intelligence, which is very dangerous. So my second inclination was to say that things exist, everything exists dually. They exist in the apparent and then the other. I was going to leave it at that. So I told you both. So let's press on and keep them both in mind. That my first inclination is to say that things exist in the apparent and the real. And remember, I decided not to do that because of reasons I mentioned, and then decided to say that things exist apparently and then the other way. This has depth of importance in trying to push your own intelligence beyond its ordinary bus station limits in ways that you have never conceived of, since you've never even heard of. So I'm going to tell you fairly directly to start with. Let's take an example. I'll hit some more in a second perhaps, but take death, which seems to be a fairly important thing to most people. There is apparent death, and then there's real death. See, it's what I would have been inclined to say originally. So, or we can say there's apparent death, and then there's the other death. In this division, now we're getting to the very hardwired, physical, material aspect of this. Human beings only talk about the apparent. That's it. No matter what they think. If they'd ever had occasion to think of this, now that you've heard about it, if I announce this to the world in general, and they listen for a second, no matter, they're quite ordinary people, would deny this, it is a fact. It is the way to tell the difference between that which is apparent and that which is real. It is a non-fail method to determine that which people talk about is the apparent. This is directly connected with the areas that I have already designated as being, and the activities as being primary, that which is absolutely minimally life-supporting at the most basic physical level, and secondary activities, which, although at a more complex level, are necessary. That is, that you must be concerned, ordinary people, about the way they look, their position in life, and how much money they have, and whether they're doing better than their friends, and all of the things that from one viewpoint, just physically, are not life-supporting. And yet, for the purposes that humanity in general is serving for life, they are necessary. But for the reasons that you need to use to map out your own exploration is why I've designated them secondary. that an individual here and there, as does happen, can have very little, almost no, involvement with secondary activities. Not because that they decided or because they understood it, but because of some genetic defect. They can be that way individually and still have the primary activities going on, or it can happen through accident, that you're laid up and you're in a brain-dead coma for 30 years, and yet primary activities take place, even without your assistance perhaps, that they feed you, they keep you on a respirator, and you live. So primary activities are being seen to, but there would be no secondary activities. Can you see a direct connection between that and what I have just mentioned regarding things being apparent and things being real? It is that people, ordinary intelligence, never speaks of the real. And that being the case, without there being any understanding, just having to do with the mathematical economics, the symmetry, the unseen symmetry of life itself, is then people overspeak regarding the secondary. This is the unheralded, the unrecognized basis of many people, of large parts of life's body, acting as social critics at times, continues to harangue other people that they talk too much, or that what they talk about is uninteresting, is irrelevant, is foolish, is just palaver. If you can begin to see that there is a balance, that is, human speech can be seen as being a secondary activity, that you can go through life, you can be mute physically and live. You can be brain dead so that there's no language, we'll assume, even going on inside of your nervous system in the brain, and you can still live. So from that particular place outside the city, you could see that language, speech in general, is secondary. Since men cannot speak about that, which is the other, I don't want to tell you that primary and the real is synonymous. That'd be too easy. Or that secondary and the apparent is the same thing. Don't even think that. That is way too apparent, way too obvious. If you catch yourself wanting to do that, just slap your little self in the brain and say, no, no. Bad brain, don't do that. Just like a little cat, do not jump on to conclusions. Perhaps some of your conclusions look like an overstuffed sofa, but say, no, no. Besides death, how about sorts of things that we have even mentioned in the last few weeks? Humanity, some part of humanity forever has been getting into certain verbal areas and saying that some human is made to say, well, what I want to mention now, what I want to talk about, I'm almost speechless, I don't think there's words for it. And even I use that term. But of late, at least on 3 occasions, you remember, recently I have said to you, sort of a little off center of the stage, what if that's not true? What if there are quite readily available words, and just ordinary words can quite adequately describe anything that needs to be described? I don't care what it is. How about the idea, the notion that people can change? It's a matter of willpower, strength of character, determination. And the likewise widely held idea that people can't change. People are victims of circumstance, victim of their genes. They're just, the weight of the universe is on people once you sort of grow up and you fall into the ruts of behaving a certain way. We would apparently have, again, 2 clear-cut choices, to use those examples, that either words in certain areas just won't do it. They're inadequate to describe certain things, or that's just simply not true. That anything that exists, that somebody can think about, They can describe it verbally. If they tell you they can't, then they're just deluded up here. They're befuddled. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're thinking. Because they did, if they're thinking something, there's got to be a word for it or they couldn't think it. There's got to be a description. So for somebody to say, well, I've had mystical dreams and I've had great insights, thanks to the great Norwegian gods that have helped me during the cold winter nights, but the many marvelous things I've seen, there's no way to describe it. You could say, well, you hadn't seen anything. If you've seen it and you knew you saw it, you had to think, well, hey, there's a so-and-so. And so to tell somebody, well, I had great insight, but there's no words for it, you could say, well, that's simply not true. But it would appear to be a very clear-cut choice, right? It's one or the other. Or people can change. Here's examples. People can change, but wait a minute. Some else can say, wait a minute. People can't change. And then they begin to prove it logically. They can even apply it to you. The person assuming that you could change, if they knew you well enough or could talk fast enough, they could point out or start asking you questions about, do you do so-and-so, do you do so-and-so, or do you not do so-and-so, and you get some place, and they say, well, all right, do you think you should be that way? And you go, no. And you say, well, why don't you change? You say change is possible, and then you'd start with things like, well, wait a minute. And so it would appear to be that you could even make somebody say, wait a minute, maybe it's true that people can't change, but it's got to be one or the other, right? Now back. There is the apparent in anything, like these two questions. We're looking for the answer. Are words adequate to explain anything, or are they not? All right. An answer. Not two answers, not one answer, but two answers. There is the apparent answer, and there's the real answer, the other answer. The question, can people change? Just in general, forget any kind of metaphysical and kicking around the King's English. I'm just asking you, can people change? Or can people not change? All right, there's got to be an answer, right? One answer. It's either yes or no. No. There are two answers. There's the apparent answer, and then there's the other answer, the real answer. Now, ordinary intelligence should say, well, all right, for God knows what reason I've followed you thus far, but wait a minute. That didn't really say anything to say, all right, there's the real answer and then the apparent answer, because which is it? Yes? Is yes the apparent answer? No the... I don't know. So you jumped on the sofa again. You did follow me through that little alley, didn't you? That for me to say there's the apparent answer and the real answer, it's not that you would think, all right, well, there are two answers to saying can people change or not change. There's either you can say yes or no. And so yes or no is the apparent answer according to you, and the real answer is either yes or no. Which one's left, right? No. God, you ain't listening. No. It's only the apparent answer that people speak of. Always. That's a rule. So whatever it is that people speak of, and whose people? You decide. You, somebody else, at any given time. The one they speak of is always, without exception, the apparent. It's not the other one. That is a rule. It's just never been stated in this universe. Whatever answer, whichever, down to those examples I used of good, straightforward, yes or no type questions. Whichever answer you speak of, whichever answer anyone else speak of, is the apparent answer. I'm just giving you a guarantee. No beating around the bush. It's the apparent answer. I don't care what it is. If one person, if you say, can people change or not change, and a man who looks like he might know something, or even a woman, and says, yes, men can, that person gave you the apparent answer. If you turn right around and ask someone else, his brother-in-law, the man who taught him, and you ask him, can people change or not change? And he'll say, I'm sorry, but my student, my confederate here is incorrect, because people cannot change. Now, are you going to say that's the real answer? No, you're not listening. That's the apparent answer. Always. Ordinary intelligence cannot speak. It cannot speak of the other one. That's why there are two. That's why you have the apparent one, or no one could talk. But the other one, ordinary intelligence cannot speak of. Cannot. If you get some personal, clear-cut, even glimpse of this, then you'll understand the absolute, let's see, there's no good word to cover this. Oh, all right. Futility. It's not bad, but I just hate to use words other people have used. You know. You always think like a trade-in Trojan store or something. I don't. Not futility. The futility throughout history and throughout your history of people wondering what is the nature of true and false. The reason they can't come to an answer is this. Now, by true, they don't know my terms and my sketch of this for you in this new unexplored area. But they're using true at a more simplistic level. They're using it, there's no good word for this, but I'll say synonymously. Synonymously with what I'm saying is the other, that is the real, right? They can't locate it. Why? I just told you a couple of minutes ago. Because the real, which if I'm hinting to you in a decent fashion, that is sort of synonymous with what they mean by the truth. They can't speak of it. See, you've forgotten already, I'll tell you again. The way you tell the difference between the apparent and the real, and there is such a thing, there is a dual reality going on continually. God knows how many people, lots of people that do not even look as weird as some of you people do, throughout history have suspected that. And they just, nobody knows what to do with it except, you know, keep that to yourself or they may lock you up. There is, in everything, there are two of them. There's the apparent one and then there's another one. It just is. It's right around the corner. You're seeing the 3D version with ordinary intelligence. You're of course seeing a 4D version, but you can't even conceive of that. So you're seeing the 3D version. That's the apparent. I mean, look at the word. That's what apparent is. It appears. You can see it. You can think about it. That's the apparent. There's another one, which is why language does not satisfy people. Most people don't get all involved like you people and, you know, waste your life, well, and spend your time doing such as this. They just go along with it. But people know. People know that something's wrong with language. Ordinary people will say, well, wait a minute. What I wanted to tell you was, wait a minute, there's no good word for it. And that's a cab driver, a bricklayer. Never even heard of cot. He just says, I cannot. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. If people say, oh, I love you, I love you. Tell me again. I said I love you, I love you. I know, but it doesn't sound right. It doesn't feel right. Well, I don't know what else to do. Everyone knows at a certain level that language is lacking something. And I'm telling you what it is. That which ordinary intelligence can speak of is always the apparent. And there is something else to whatever it is. Love, hate, whatever the subject is. There is the apparent and there is the other. Ordinary intelligence can only speak of the apparent. So, if I was trying to point to you in a profitable way, I'm going back up. That's why I started this. Again, when people think, when people say that if there's any important question anywhere, it's got to be, or just for ordinary, everyday affairs, is you've got to be able to discern the truth from the false. Just in everyday affairs, and whether people are going to cheat you on a horse trading deal, or whether it's in some cosmic manner that I need to contemplate for my own ultimate benefit or enjoyment. They're using truth as best they can. Kind of synonymously with what I'm telling you is the other version. And they use the false, sort of, as I'm telling you, is the apparent. Now, do you see why no one can ascertain, quote, the truth? And it doesn't matter if somebody over here says A is the truth. All right, we'll write that down. A man over here says contraire. B, or anti-A, is the truth. All right, we'll write that down. Neither one of it's correct. In any case, whatever any individual says, whatever the person can speak of, is only the apparent. There's no way out, there's no beginning, there's no end. This law did not start yesterday. You cannot slip in on a grandfather clause like things you said 20 years ago doesn't count because you didn't know about this. It's always been true. Plus you'll understand why history always needs, if you're trying to read it, 2 or 3 good shots of Louisiana hot sauce. Because something is drastically missing. because history is remembered in books through language. And all they can do is record the apparent, which seems self-evident, right? It's self-evident. What else are they going to record? My imagination? Not going to sit around and make up history? I don't know. But what they recorded was the apparent, but there was always something else going on. It's going on right now. Us doing this. There's the apparent, then there's the other. I wanted you to see, because it is not just a verbal, an attempted verbal celebration of some kind, that the whole idea of the truth, and that people saying, well, I'm going to study, I'm going to figure out, I'm going to pursue the truth. It's just a secondary hobby, it's entertainment. Because anything they're ever going to say about it, whatever it is, they're just saying, well, I feel like I'm getting closer. I feel like I'm not getting closer. I sure am enjoying the chase. I feel frustrated. It doesn't matter what they say. All they're speaking of is the apparent of whatever they're speaking of. And that is just one possibility. The other one is what this is about. The other one is being able to get into one more dimensional mention intellectually. And you see that there is the apparent, and then there's the other. And of course, when you begin to see that, you'll know why I decided not to call it the real. Boy, is that a cheap word. Unless, of course, you're paying real prices in the real city. And then they won't charge you more than they do for ersatz knockoffs. But once you see that there are two versions of everything, that there are two sort of realities, not being science fictionally about it, fiction-y, and the only thing that can ordinarily be commented upon is the apparent. And withal, why people talk so much about that which ultimately won't get you anywhere. You individually. Because the only thing they can talk about is the apparent, not the other, not the real, not the more complex. All the thing they can talk about is the apparent. And humanity just in general is weighted to know, non-verbally, that something's wrong, something's amiss, something's flawed, something's missing. As we've been through all this, it's why people want to change, it's why people are here, it's why people are drinking, it's why people are doing drugs, it's why people are in church attending mass, lighting candles. Anybody has the least amount of frustration understands this. But part of the thing is anything, the intellect, the guiding light, it would seem, to lead men out of the wilderness and into the promised land, is this. But this thing doing its best, running on all 8 cylinders right after an oil change, clean air filters, all it can do is comment on the apparent. And I guess if you get a spring tune-up for your brain, perhaps you can comment a little more coherently or even cogently on the apparent than the next person, but so what? That's like saying that I'm trying to get from here to Jupiter and I'm using a chariot. Yeah, I know it doesn't seem real good, but wait a minute. And then you take it and have it tuned up. Perhaps it makes you feel better. Work on it yourself. Keep tinkering with it. Try and put a turbocharger. Try to put on 4 wheels. You understand? It doesn't matter. You're still dealing with the secondary. You're still dealing with the apparent. Since so many enjoyed the night I used allusions of Detroit and the great automobile industry, as long as I'm here, how about this? Let me point out very specifically again that talk is not an add-on. Talk is not an accessory. Talk is not optional. The vehicle comes with it. Nowhere along the line did you say, well, all right, you can skip the power steering, you can skip musical ability, but give me talk, give me language. Or contrary, somewhere along the way, you didn't say, well, wait a minute. I'm pretty athletically inclined. I believe maybe I can get somewhere in sports. Skip talk. Skip talk. It's not an add-on. It's not optional. Now, we're not talking about outside the main bell curve of people born with their own genetic problems. We're talking about the mainstream hoi polloi of the great state of man. The reason I point this out is there are people who look at language, always have. There's been parts of life's body that believe that language not only was lacking in some way, whether they could describe it or not. There are people who, in fact, have shaken their little fist at language. You knew that. You just didn't know you knew it. Now, I'll point out to you again how common it is. People believe that they're on some great cosmic quest, and two or three of them get together under whatever umbrella name and decide, well, let's all get together and really improve ourselves and get our minds so sharp that we can even go into other dimensions and converse with whoever's there, whoever did all this. And let them say, okay, let's do. What's the first thing we'll do? All right, let's all hang out together over here and let's see, what else can we do? Hey, let's don't talk. And they'll go, right on. Boy, that's a great idea. I was going to say the same thing. And sure enough, for hundreds, thousands of years, this group of people don't talk. That's what they're famous for, is not talking. Maybe making some bread or some wine on the side. But what are they famous for? Outside their little business enterprises. Those people never talk. And people not even with the same religion, very oft times will go, my, my. It doesn't change their life, but for a second they think, my, how impressive. And it even strikes them that there could be some kind of spooky validity, some kind of value in not talking. How much of that bread I got to go? But there is an awareness out there in life that in some way ordinary talk, maybe we should put aside until we get better. Maybe until I get smarter. Maybe until I know more what I'm doing, I should just quit talking instead of running my mouth. It's not that unusual. It's not hard. Not people that's just gone into monasteries. It's not hard. You can put out ad somewhere and say, self-help course, brand new 1989, how to improve your brain course, free introductory lesson. And people show up, and you say free beer. So you get a good crowd, and they show up, and you talk a while like, well, you should do so-and-so, you should be kind to your neighbor, and you should be kind to all God's little animals and your children, and you should buy my book. You don't have to, but it's for sale out there because they'll give you more detail. And you should not put real hot objects in your ear, and you should probably not try and live in a marital state with more than 17 people at once. Oh, and most of you would be better off if you wouldn't talk so much, and perhaps even 7 hours a day, like on a Saturday or a Sunday, is actually don't talk. You would have many people just show up, and they thought was, of course, you could tell them it was in real estate investing, that they could do better at real estate sales if they would pick out one day a week, and at least for part of that day, is not talk. You'd get all sorts of people that'd go out and they'd write that down and try it. Because they hear about it, and it does not strike the bell curve of humanity as being that perverse, that strange. It's like, yeah. And you don't have to present it in some religious context. Now back to twee. To what end? Because I've already told you that life makes people talk, over speak, about their parent because of the fact that they cannot speak of the other one. And so it's as though they're making up that you've got the two realities going on. And at least from a secondary level, people are wired up that they could speak, and they want to without knowing it. They want to speak about both of them. And let's say that being the fair-minded person that most Homo sapiens are, had they the ability, I'm sure that they'd keep track and want to spend 50% of their talk on the apparent and then 50% on the other, the real. But so since they cannot speak at all about the latter, then they have to put it all into the former. Based upon that, I'm suggesting to you, no matter how ordinary people can describe it, such as, well, a lot of people talk too much and it just wastes your time, and you suggest to them, well, don't you talk so much and knock it off 6 hours a day or 6 hours one day a week, and then go, you're right. To what end? Life makes people do it, which I told you, but not to what end are people so obliging if you say, hey, try it for me. I bet your sales will go up, all you salespeople. whatever day you normally take off, like a Saturday. No meditation on that crap. Just get off by yourself. Maybe go play golf or just go out and practice your driving out in the backyard, or go out and float around in the pool. But just for 6 hours, just trust me, don't talk. Don't go hide out. Just do not talk. And people go, you're right. To what end are people wired up that they will accept that they will hear it and give real credence to it? Like, you're right, I should do that. I even thought about that. I read about that once, and I meant to do it. There's another aspect, and of course you got to remember that it's not an add-on, but here you've got almost an accessory, a necessary accessory that comes with a vehicle that many people look at as being some kind of add-on, or it's like you got power steering that came with the vehicle, and sometimes the car goes where it wants to. That is, I want to say, be still, trembling lips. Shut up, rapid tongue. It just seems like that the power steering is just out of control. The windows just go up and down by themselves, and I wish I could do something. It came with the vehicle. There's another way, though, that you should look at talk. Talk is like an intellectual enzyme, a necessary intellectual enzyme. Were it not for talk, the nervous system would not operate as it does. And an enzyme, everyone I'm sure recalls, an enzyme is a change, or that which produces a change. I think it's supposed to be a chemical change, but we don't have to worry about that. But an enzyme is something that helps accelerate a change, and yet this additional thing, the enzyme, is itself unaffected. That you can stick an enzyme into a chemical reaction, and it accelerates some particular reaction chemically in these other substances. And of course the enzyme, which is not the real point, is unaffected, but it accelerates what could go on, a potential. I say it's not important, but as long as I'm here, let me do point this out. If you can see talk, or at least remember this, it might bring you some pleasure at a future date. If you can see talk as an intellectual enzyme, a necessary enzyme, and then consider what enzymes are, because you know I don't normally hold us to simple literary dictionary definitions of a word, but insofar as an enzyme actually being an additional substance that itself is unaffected, even though it affects some process already going on or a potential process, then, are you still with me? Then we could say this, that which is actually said may come and go, but talk itself is for fucking ever. Well, do look at between the primary and the secondary levels in you, or look at what would appear to be, this is more difficult to do, but some of you should be able to do it, between the verbal and the nonverbal areas of the nervous system loop. And then see that talk is an enzyme, because that which is potential, you got to be tricky to be able to do this, because you've got to be able to take your own brain and imagine that which has not yet happened, but it's already happened. But you got to imagine how it would be if it had not have occurred, which requires that you get into new areas, because you cannot stay around the court of Isabel and Ferdinand, because they've seen it all before. And you can't say, well, hey, let's imagine that, you know, when I came in here 2 months ago to ask you to finance the trip, you know, for me to play Explorer Errant, and they went, yeah, well, let's play like, just trust me, let's play like that hadn't happened yet. If I must point out to you, do it in your own nervous system. Don't worry about this, but if you got to, do you understand that there the king would go, wait a minute, you're staying there telling me that let's pretend that you hadn't gotten here yet. Yeah. Ordinary intelligence, being played tonight by good King Ferdinand, would want to say, well, wait a minute, you're going about this all wrong. You cannot stand there and say, hey, king, that is, other voice, let's pretend this thing, you know, such as me talking to you right now, let's pretend this hadn't happened yet. You want to? And no one go, wait a minute, no. We can pretend something else, like we'll pretend something else, but you can't say, let's pretend that what you're doing right now is not happening, because what you're asking me to do is pretend that it's not happening. And Ferdinand said, I'm getting a headache. And his wife would say, lay down and get a hot cloth for your head. It's good sometimes to lose everybody, isn't it? All right. Where I was starting was to try and get you to picture what it would be in the nonverbal area of the loop of what it would be that would take something non-verbally, that is, from a primary level that needs to be brought into a secondary level, to turn sex into a hobby, to turn sex into pornography, to a business, to turn food, not from eating to stay alive, but to gourmetting. All right, gourmetting. It's to try and imagine what it would be before it was, verbally, which was the trick. And then to see that the thing that made it become what it was adding talk. That's what turns primary. It doesn't turn it in the city sense. It doesn't make it. But the primary cannot become the secondary unless the enzyme of talk is added. There would not be anything as much fun as going to the Four Seasons and spending $100 for a cheese sandwich, or seeing photographs of other people doing it, of having pornography, of being able to watch somebody else go out and play sports, to pay money to watch somebody else run around a circle and sweat. None of that would be possible without the enzyme of talk. That the primary activities, exercise, sex, food, would never get into the needed areas of them taking on the entertainment value in the queue. They would never turn into secondary activities without the enzyme of talk. I mean, that there are people who say we talk too much. Lay down and put a cold cloth around your head. Talk is a necessary enzyme. But people then, even further, if I must point out the obvious, and why not? It's what the obvious is for. If it didn't want to be pointed out, it wouldn't be obvious. At least that's just my opinion. Is people not only will say, Parts of Life Body will not only say, wait a minute, a lot of people talk too much. Not only that, if they get just a bit more sophisticated, that is a little bit less simplistic, they may say, all right, people do talk too much, but that's not really the half of it. It's that what they talk about is of no value, or what they talk about is by and large erroneous, is outdated, is prejudicial. In other words, they're saying the content, that they might agree with the first more simplistic statement that people by and large talk too much, which I've told you why. They got no choice. They can't talk about the other one, so they got to talk about the apparent reality. And since they're half of it they can't talk about, they got to make up for it. So you hadn't forgotten that. I knew that. And so somebody could say, all right, I hear the comment that men talk too much in general. I can agree to that. But we've got to go further. It's not just the volume of talk. And I don't mean the decibels, the quantity of talk. It's not just that, it's the content itself. It's bad enough, I agree, says some ordinary intelligence, that people probably talk too much. But it's worse than that. It's what they talk about is wrong, misleading, superfluous. I mean, how can you miss it any more than that? That is such a mess that they're back to back with being real close to it. That's when I said that it was nice to lose all of you when I was going to give you something to remember, and I thought a lot of you go, ah, and you did, and you went. And that was when I said the thought for the night regarding this paragraph could be that what is actually said, that is the content of anything, any sentence, any book, any thought you had, what is actually said may come and go, but talk itself is forever. That's what's important. But notice, it churns up everyone's account, keeps everyone active to some degree by believing not only that people, if it's pointed out, talk too much. You know, you drive me nuts, why don't you people shut up? And it don't have to be large groups of people, of course. A woman's thinking to her husband, why don't he shut up about those, whatever it is. Shut up. And then you say, well, does he talk all that much? Well, it's not just the amount of talk, but it's the damn stuff he talks about. He'll sit there and talk about basketball. What the hell do I care about basketball? So she's pointing out it's also the content. If he would talk about something that was halfway interesting. So it's not just the amount of talk, it's the content, right? To each other, people believe if they heard suddenly out in the city, just ordinary intelligence, my description of there being two realities, the apparent and then the other one, the real one, then people, each individual would say, well, by and large, people who annoy me, like when my husband talks too much, my wife talks too much. I'm glad you pointed that out, because I tell you what they're doing, to use your descriptions, that is mine, they'd say, what they're doing is talking about the appearances of things, superficial crap like basketball. And you'd say, well, there's an alternative then. They'll say, well, yeah. It's not, as I told you, it's not just the amount my husband talks, but if he would talk about something that had some quality, something that I could participate, something that had just a modicum of value to it. So they're saying that what they could talk about would be the other, right? What they just talked about, the part I just played, was the apparent, because that's what apparent to them. I didn't lose you again, come on. In other words, one person seeing through the folly of another one, that's not seeing the real. Even if some way, if a group around you of 12 stout-hearted men and women listened to your description of this other person and said, all right, what they talk about is just apparent stuff, just superfluous. And these 12 people listened to it and said, we agree. It doesn't matter. That is, the people who said, all right, we see through that. To take his description, this person, you're right, madam, your husband talks about none but the apparent. And so they are tacitly then saying, by my description, we are not, especially by our judgment, by our investigation of this, because we could not make a judgment of this, right? We couldn't see that this is just the apparent unless we were seeing otherwise, right? How often do you people, I've got to point out to you how beautiful, subtle, how beautifully subtle and dastardly life has things arranged, that when you see through error, I mean, when it can be pointed out that this perchance is an error, and you and a whole bunch of people look at it and say, yes it is, because we can compare what we think to that, and so therefore these are two different things. And your intelligence says it is. Well, it is two different things, because there's what that person believes, is witness for what he said, and here's what we're saying that he said, what we saw him say. So we got two different things. But they both resemble paper cuts. We got to turn the tape over. I'm going to leave that area for tonight, but I didn't give you a large preface, but I'm telling you that many of you could mine that one for some real jewels. Everything you think, there's no exception to this, everything that you ordinarily think of, you and every other person, every other nervous system that can speak, that even uses language to itself, but everything that is said is a representation of two parallel, always available. It's not hit or miss, it's not maybe. Two, there's no good word for this, realities. The apparent one and another one. And the only thing that is ever spoken of, the only thing you ever hear spoken of, this gets closest to being any kind of exception, but that's not what we're talking about. The only thing to be spoken of is always speech about the apparent. And I don't care if one person over here says A and another person over here says anti-A. It does not matter. I am suggesting to you that you could find perhaps a way to step into, or at least start beginning to get across the boundaries of the established frontier to realize that, because your intelligence, your own thinking, can lead you to believe that you are making some kind of progress, or that you're at least making some kind of change. That, well, for a while I stood like this on my left foot, and then I realized, well, perhaps there's some validity to staying on this foot. It's the same foot. You can think about and talk about one thing, and then apparently an hour later, a minute later, a day later, 2 years later, after extensive study, say something else about the same subject. Does that not? Is life not arranged in everyone's little brain molecules to where is that not a sign of some, well, it's got to be progress of some kind, that I believed so-and-so 2 years ago, but now after studying, learning how to read it in the original Armenian, my opinion of this has changed at least 23 degrees to the left. If you can say it, if your ordinary intelligence says, well, this is now blah blah, this is now it, this is the truth, this is closer to the truth, this has more validity, it doesn't matter what it is, the only thing it can speak of is the apparent. Some of you might even, once you begin to see this more clearly, not only want to join me sometimes in giving a rousing cheer for life's death-defying legerdemain within inside of our nervous systems with the 2 hand puppets, but that even your own intelligence down to this level, you might want to give it a small party or just blow one of those little whistles one time for it. That though it is for many decades, it made you think, wait a minute, I'm getting somewhere. And all you were getting was going, it was all speech about the apparent, that was the only track of those 2 parallels that it could speak of, the only one it could see, the only one it could comprehend. I'm going to leave that for now. Sort of. Can you recall from your own wide reading and thinking that historically, philosophically, men have never been intellectually satisfied in their attempts to make, especially when it appears to be or is metaphorical, philosophical comparisons, but in a particular way, that somebody can say that after studying, either extensively and academically or perhaps just casually in their own backyard, an ant colony, that there are distinct parallels between an ant colony and human civilization. Then the person will assume that somebody who's playing a fairly intellectual role within the machinery of life's body to even make such an observation, but especially if they do so publicly or in print, they will say this though. They'll say, however, the ant colony, human civilization, that is the 2 things. However, the 2 are not perfectly alike. The parallel is not unconditional. It is always added. You do it to yourself, even if you do not use those exact words, if something strikes you really profound, such as, you know, baseball is almost a metaphor. I mean, life is almost a metaphor for baseball. I like my version better. And then you could go off. I've never done this, but you can do it yourself. I bet somebody's already done it. I'm sure they have. And point out about how trying to get to first base, how you to get in the lineup, is like trying to get through school, trying to get yourself prepared to even be in the lineup, to get on the batter's deck. That you've got to be fortunate, you've got to make the kind of sacrifices and effort that a baseball player would have to do when other kids are out running around trying to steal a Playboy from the 7-Eleven store when nobody's looking. This kid had to be out practicing, batting, fielding. He had to make these sacrifices the same way as in life. And then once you get up there at the bat, the first one can go past you. You could even be looking off and distracted, and they holler strike one. But same as in life. Just because you get defeated the first time you the first little business you start, the first career you start, perhaps life, those are strike by you before you even knew what happened. But no, don't be discouraged because you still have 2 strikes left, and on and on and on. They can do such as that. You can think it to yourself. And the human nervous system will make you say to yourself, if not somebody else, that, God, that's striking. I can begin to think so metaphorically. But still, the comparison between the two are not, they're not exactly alike. I mean, it's not an exact comparison. The human brain being what it is, there are 2 great areas that it overlooks in that comment. The first one is that somewhere along the line, any 2 things at some point are exactly alike. It is a fallacious statement which seems to abide no possible exception to it to say, wait a minute. An ant colony, I can draw all kinds of parallels, perhaps more than with baseball. But the way they work together, and they're being a leader, and they're being workers, and them all having jobs and a division of labor. And I even see one that looks like he's trying to unionize. that there are certainly comparisons between ant colonies, the structure of their, as insecty as it may be, of their activities, between that and human civilization, and yet, of course, they're not exactly alike. Wrong. Yeah. The statement. And this may strike some of you if you're just listening slightly right this second, that will listen with great importance, but it is. It just shows again that information that the human nervous system has in its brain, no matter how intelligent and how learned you are, it is filled with information that is accepted as being self-evident, not even open to discussion, and it's all flawed. And I'm just trying to show you another example to say, wait a minute. It's not... Anybody knows it is not a perfect example. You can only take the comparison. I mean, even stretching metaphors to the point to make them go, oh, there is no real comparison other than literarily, philosophically, between an ant colony and human civilization. Wrong. There's one spot somewhere that, contrary to that, there was one place, there was one spot in 4-dimensional movement, that is, including non-stop, seamless time, there was one spot. It may have yet to be, but there is one spot wherein the 2 are exactly alike. That's true with anything. I don't care what it is. Ant colonies and baseball. And it seems to be, without question, correct. Seems to be true, at least, that no 2 things that the human intellect can think of, and that may have comparisons, that a marriage is somewhat like spring training. I don't know what that means. A marriage is like starting a new business. A marriage is like buying a new car that was a demo. And your brain can begin to wow out the many ways that they have certain parallels, and yet you will say, or else you'll reach the point, and if you don't have to say it yourself, but like, well, this has run out, it's run its course, because they're not exactly alike. It was just, it kind of fit into a little flight of metaphorical fancy, tropical fancy even. But the 2 are not exactly alike. Wrong. Somewhere, any 2 things, that is, that you think about, which will be the apparent aspect of the things, any 2 things at some point are exactly alike. That's the first thing, the flaw in that. The second one is this, that no 2 things can ever be exactly alike, because no one thing can ever be compared to itself and be exactly alike. Mary J. here cannot be compared to itself 5 minutes from now, much less 2 years from now. Religion B cannot be compared to itself 2,000 years ago. Nation W cannot in any way, it and its culture, its political institutions, its economic structures, cannot in any manner be compared to itself 50 years ago. Does the human intellect do that? You bet your garters. It not only does it, remember this is the second part. We've already covered the first era, that is, and not understanding that any two things, and of course you're only talking about the apparent reality of it, that any two things that you think about are at some point exactly alike. The second flaw is that no two things can ever be exactly alike, because no one thing can ever be exactly alike. And yet the human intellect, it does it historically, continually. You just never noticed it. Continually. And I don't mean just in history books. They do it on the news, they do it in commentaries, and assuming that you are civilized and fairly addicted to news and contemporary events, to every now and then watch the news or read a paper, your own nervous system makes these kind of judgments, to wit, that something, the economy of our country, whatever country you're in, the economy of this country had reached a kind of pleasing balance under the administration of the Green Party, but now for the last 7 years that we have been under the Purple Party, I don't think we'll ever again see that kind of economic stability and fairness to all the people. That is presented, that is said, and you may have thought it or heard it and nodded along, that is said as though, my God, talk about a profound observation. Do you realize how flawed that is? Because it's so true, except it can't be. To say that we will never reach the kind of balance between the temporal state and the religious underpinnings that is indeed the very foundations of civilization, we will never again approach, for all of its shortcomings, we'll never again approach the heyday of the Holy Roman Empire, or anything you want to pick out. That is no comment worthy of the human intellect, if it could operate even the way the dictionary says it should. To say that our civilization is nothing like it was 50 years ago. And it would seem to be, I could make them up if I made that too obtuse. How about this? The American civilization as we know it will never be exactly like it was in those more naive times right after WW2 of the 50s. We will never again apparently be able to eradicate the scourge of drugs on our streets. We'll never be able to go back to a more pristine, a safer time like the 50s. And that passes for being insight. It passes for being the truth. They are trying to compare that which cannot be compared. This is not a commentary on history or the fallacy of social commentary or of historical observation, because you, yes, you, do that same thing to your individual past. If people did not, we would not have psychiatrists, we would not have priests, we would not have attorneys, we would not have civilization. Ordinary memory, that aspect of the human brain, of ordinary intelligence, in its own history, your individual past, has those two same follies, undiscovered, unrecognized flaws, that you think about things and you try to compare them in your past, about the way you treated your mother, the way you treated your brother, or your sibling, your sister, and then the way they treated you, or the way you treated your brother, and then of course the way things worked out, and then the way the guy next door, his brother treated him, same ages, and you were growing up. All these comparisons You're never satisfied with them. And then you think, well, wait a minute. On a good day you think, well, you can't exactly compare any two things. Wrong. Second flaw. You try and compare yourself, your life itself, and say, well, things now will never be exactly. I don't guess I'll ever be as happy as I was when I first went to college. And it's not just age. I had my dreams then. Blah, blah, blah. I'll never be as happy socially now that my first wife left me. I can never have the kind of fulfillment in my life now that my poor mother died than I had knowing she was alive. That is the second folly. You cannot talk about anything. You know, I've started saying several years, months, hours. You cannot speak about anything literally a second after it happened in the 3D world and compare it with itself. Now, at the ordinary level, this is beyond meaningless, even if people made any sense out of it. Because they have to. That's the nature of the human intellect working, and that seems to be the nature of some continuity, some sanity for life, is how do you know right now whether you're relatively happy and satisfied? The only way you can do it is to compare it. Well, I'm a little upset tonight. No, I'm not suicidal, but I'm going to tell you the truth, I'm a little upset. And then you start saying either to somebody else or to yourself that you're a little out of sorts, but, and then you compare it to something else. But, you know, it's because I just found out my wife has left me. I just got home, and so as you can understand, I'm not quite the same person I was this morning when I left 12 hours ago. I thought everything was all right. What kind of comment is that? It's the same thing as saying, well, I don't think we'll ever see that kind of profitable balance between clerical and temporal powers, the state and the religious underpinnings of civilization, as we did during the latter part of the 1700s in Western Europe. So what? What kind of intelligent comment is that? A man's individual memory, a person's individual memory, because of the continual molecular shift, without you apparently having to do anything to it. That is, the you that you think's the voice, you're part of the dialogue. You don't have to be neurotic. You don't have to be traumatized. If you can in some way separate what you call you from this going on, it's no problem. It's going to shift enough that it reconstructs all memory anyway. It's not that you're sitting around, when I've used the term of reconstruction of memory, it is not. Although it's easy to believe in the city that people say, well, you're asking about my first wife. I know she's told some of you people at parties since then. She's told you some of the stories about what caused our breakup. What a crock. Come here, I'll tell you what happened. It is not that people are so self-centered, that people are so egotistical, that people are so self-blinded by their own desires that they've got to make up stories and redo the past. That's one explanation. You can call that the reconstruction of memory. That you're trying to look after your own interests, trying to put yourself in a better light, right? Blah, 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 blah. Forget all that. If it was possible to take that away, if you could take that, what ordinary people think of as being your conscious participation, well, even your subconscious participation, if in some way we could take this sense of you, as Grunhilde or Siegfried, and for a few minutes we could take you outside just the runnings, the mechanical runnings of your brain, assuming it would still go on without you, you could take a walk for a few minutes. Here's the thing. Because of the molecular shift of everything, including your brain, it will reconstruct the past as a matter of course. If you take a walk just around the block, just for a couple of minutes, and come back and ask your brain, all right, you remember a while ago what we were thinking about just before I went for the walk? And your brain goes, yeah. You say, all right, read it back to me. And let's assume that you left and you could hold on to exactly what it was that you were thinking, as far as you're concerned. That is what you were apparently thinking. You would come back in 2 minutes and say, all right, brain, read it back. And like a good court stenographer, you'd assume they'd read back exactly what it was. It would never be exactly like it was. Never. Within 2 minutes, within 2 seconds, but especially 2 minutes. 2 hours, 2 days, forget it. It is not the same. not from some objective standard. It is not the same apparently if you could go back and actually compare the two.
No.
Do you see what this does about what people think? No? All right, can you see what this does to what people think they think? It's again a part that I can encourage you to consider, that you do not really have your hand on the throttle at all until you recognize that memory, not only the thought process, but let's just work on memory again for a second. Until you realize that what you remember not only is an uncontrollable, automatic, necessary shifting and reconstruction, wherein not even your own life can be compared to itself. But not only is that true, but then to understand, there's just one short step across the river from there, that memory is not individual and personal. It is general, it is genetic. What you're remembering is not your life. What you're remembering is not through your memory. It's life's memory. You got a piece of it. It is not personal. Forget, I've not even been dirty enough to say the obvious, that your life's not personal. Let's no need to get down and be insulting on a fine spring Monday. Just your memory. Your memory is not personal, which is, of course, flabbergasting, if not insane, to ordinary intelligence, because it says, and I think I could speak for most people's intelligence, with a fair amount of sarcasm. Let's say, right, yeah, my memory is not mine, like I remember my life, but what I remember is not my memory, right. Where can I sign up to buy your books, or do you have a set of cassettes that would help me sell more real estate on that basis? Well, if you begin to see, which some of you are getting glimpses here in the last 10 or 15 minutes when we talk about this, that there's no doubt, you should know this by now, that you cannot, if there was a clinical way to freeze frame your whole life, just frame by frame, that just apparently, we're just talking about you, what appeared to you to happen, what appeared to you for you to think about what happened. If you could go back just an hour ago, 30 minutes ago, and now look at it as the way it appears to you and the way you apparently think about it right now, and compare it, it has shifted. And I don't care if it seems to be of no consequence. It's to simply see, and some of you should be able to have your little nervous system begin to vibrate and go, that's got to be true, because it is true. But to see that, then how could you say, well, my memory is personal? My memory is individual, it's mine. Well, if it is, it's faulty as a mother. You got a broken one, you got one malfunctioning. But you don't, because your memory is not your memory. It is not some individual memory, which again, I'll admit, is just, there's no good word for this. Oh, all right, insane. To ordinary intelligence, to say, all right, what you remember, it's not really your memory. Yeah, whose is it? Who have I got? Check the label, check inside and see if his mother sold his name in his underwear of his brain, his memory. I got somebody else's memory. I picked it up and checking out of the restaurant by mistake. He just seems to be nuts. There is a memory, but it's not yours. It's not mine. It's not somebody else's. There is a general memory. It is genetic. You're plugged into a piece of it. The general thing, the apparent focus of your intellectual attention, of course, is on what apparently happens to you, and so your memory seems to be a personal, very personal as a matter of fact, phenomenon. And it's not. It is an organic function of life itself, and you only have a piece of it. It is always shifting, it is always changing. People will accept. You can say it sort of philosophically, but people will accept. You say, wait a minute, look around. In fact, if there's any constant in life, it's change. And people go, yeah, you're right. Things are just changing right now. The weather's changing while we're here talking. If you left your car top down on convertible, it could be soaked when you go back out. You could come in here next time, and I'd say, well, I'm going to speak on some similar matters next week, and you could come back and me not speak, or you come back next week and I apparently was half drunk, or you come back next week and apparently somebody forgot to write a script to this. And people admit, well, things do change. Then you say, well, memory changes. Memory doesn't change. I mean, assuming that you're, not brain damaged. What happened to me, I remember. That doesn't change. And there's no way to grab ordinary intelligence and slap its little face around and say, listen, listen, listen. You're saying that life changes, but in some way, your memory is outside of life. I don't want to talk about it. Don't try and confuse me. This is also connected. I threw in something a week or so ago. Let me refresh your memory. Maybe it'll make a little more sense. I pointed out that you can never recover exactly something that you lost, misplaced. That recovered, that which is recoverable, that is, that apparently that you can recover again, that you can bring back, is never, never exactly what you lost. Which I guess I'm safe in saying would make people in the city go, you folks are nuts. Well, maybe not you folks, but I'm telling you, whatever you lose, and it gets found, returned to you, or you go back after hours of search and find it, it's not exactly what you lost. Never. Never. Which seems to be of some small consequence. In fact, it may seem to be of almost not a consequence to go back and to say, well, you're right, I guess theoretically, I dropped this pocket knife here 2 hours ago and I came back, but you're right. The Earth has changed in relationship to the rest of the planets and to the Sun. And if I had the kind of super-duper electron microscope, I might realize that in some way the actual molecular structure of the knife had shifted a little bit. Oh, all right, if you're going to push me, maybe even... No, ordinary people couldn't do this. But maybe I could trick them into saying, all right, even my opinion about the knife. It was about 30 minutes ago I realized I'd lost it. You remember when I was down the road there talking to you? And at first I thought, God damn. And I wondered where it was, and I was sort of mad that I lost it, and then I thought, oh, to hell with it. But then I thought, wait a minute, that's the one my brother gave me, and now he's dead. And next time I'm home with my mother, she's inclined to say something about that knife. You're right, I kind of went through some changes, and when I went back, I might get somebody, I might trick them into saying, all right, I went back and I spent 30 minutes. Well, you saw me. I went back and I said, I got to find that knife. And by the time I got there, I was kind of mad. I hadn't thought about my brother in a long time, and I was internally choking my brother again, my poor dead brother, blaming him because of this damn knife, and my mother going to ask me about the knife, and I had to come back here, and it's making me late. I should have been down there. And so, even though this knife looks to be the same one, yeah, that's the one I lost 2 hours ago. Do you understand it's not the same one that you lost 2 hours ago? 2 hours ago when you lost it, you'd pulled it out to slice off a piece of an apple, and you eat an apple and it felt good, and you put it back in your pocket, you thought, and it fell out. It is not the same knife. At that time, if somebody had been able to jump out of the molecular bushes and say, what do you think about that knife? You'd have said something like, well, apparently, it's a pretty good knife. Stays sharp, it cut the apple. It was my brother's, and right at that time you weren't getting into all the dastardly things, and you didn't get yourself worked up enough right then to be able to hate your brother like you do after a few minutes recollection and reflection on him. And you might say, well, it was my brother's knife. It was a pretty good knife. But now, here it is 2 hours later, and you look down and you say, well, goddamn, there the motherfucker. And you grab it up, and you're still, internally, you're still mad at your brother. You've been thinking about him for the last 30 minutes while you're looking for it. Do you see? Of course, all this didn't have to do with knives, but as usual, I was trying to take you up to the launch pad there and show you the landscape of central eastern Florida and then try to launch you somewhere else. Because now I'm telling you thoughts, that which apparently has happened to you, that which you apparently have done to yourself and to other people. There is no way to go back and recover that which you have misplaced, that which you filed away. You cannot get back the same thing that you're looking for. You understand I'm talking about memory. You cannot go back and retrieve something exactly as you left it. It's not possible. No one finds that to be of any possible practical value. Well, in case you do, at least cheer up, because I keep seeing out on newsstands, bookstores, $3.95, $2.95, whatever the little paperbacks are now, how to improve your memory in 17 days. So there's your answer. No problem. $2.95. Of course, how fast can you make a chariot go? Shine it up, put air horns on it, radial tires on it. Remember, you could spend the rest of your life trying to save up to buy that word processor so that you can be a famous writer. You can keep working on that chariot while threatening, any day now, I'm going to launch this thing, and then Jupiter, here I come. Right. It's just a hobby. All memory is a hobby. All memory is entertainment. It's necessary. It is another aspect that I can, talking about the apparent part, would seem to be secondary. But then the other part is, as I've already mentioned to you, that which seems to be secondary vis-a-vis actual life-supporting activities are now primary on another level, that men have got to do them. Don't tell me I lost you again. So people have to have memory. You got to have memory. But it's just a hobby. And it cannot retrieve that which you put away, or that you laid down, that you dropped. It's not possible. Again, I could point out, that was my little backhanded hint with the 295 self-help book on memory. Besides people bad-mouthing sort of in general under certain conditions talk, people have a great fear, distrust of memory. How many fights are going on right now in bars where one guy says, well, I remember exactly what Killebrew was hitting the last year he was with the Brewers. And somebody said, 322. And suddenly they're in a fight because another guy goes on for 2 or 3 minutes. He says, Killebrew did not hit in the 300s the last 3 years he was in the major leagues. You're nuts. I can remember just like, hey, listen, you don't talk baseball, I know. And they're down there fighting. People kill each other over memory. Kill each other. Where's that quarter you owe me? I don't owe you a damn quarter. You give me that quarter, I'm going to let this knife do the talking. I'll let it collect it. You read, one man stabs his brother to death over an argument over a quarter. It wasn't just an argument over a quarter, it was an argument over memory. People, under certain conditions, have a valid, unanalyzed, and ultimately unprofitable suspicion that something is wrong with memory. Not just the simple thing you say, well, yeah, some people don't have a good memory, like when they borrow money from you, they forget about it. There is a general feel that memory, in general, they don't know these terms, but they would believe that, hey, there is two kinds of memory. There's apparent memory, but then there's something else going on. I can't quite get my hands on it. Yeah, I told you. The real part you can't talk about. Nobody can. All you can talk about is the apparent memory. Yours, everybody else's. And therefore, when it's pointed out in a certain way, quite ordinary people can have a passing, severe case of suspicions about memory, that something's going on with memory that none of us know about. Not that it's just faulty, not that just people will forget that they owe you money, but there's just a flashing sensation, like perhaps shadows rang behind you before you knew what happened. It's just a kind of uneasiness for a second that something is really amiss about memory. Of course, I just cleared it up for you. Don't thank me. Glad to do it. Well, I'm just glad I remembered to mention it. I've been wanting to touch on this for I don't know how many weeks, and I don't know, it just kept slipping off the couch. 7 minutes. What can you do with 7 minutes? Well, let's say you could play the 3-minute waltz. 2 1/3 time? Well, I'll just give you 7 minutes on the count. I guess it's probably 6 by now, but see, I'll stop now, and it's like you gained 6 minutes of life, at least of ordinary life, or at least of apparent life. See, of not having to deal with such as this, if you're really attempting to deal with it, and our nervous systems are entangled right this second, and the information is flowing, then, if I stop right now, and you can stop being apparently involved, then it's like you gained 6 minutes, maybe 5.5 now, of ordinary life. Just don't thank me, no, it's my pleasure. Just perhaps 5 more minutes just to be a goddamn peckerhead. Just be ordinary. Just be ordinary, because everyone needs a hobby. Everybody needs some quality time to be yourself. Well, to be your apparent self, I should say.